Get up. It's a Moody morning. 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 Better get up on it. Hey, it's a Moody morning. Don't let your mornings be moody. Let them be moody.
Well, hello, boys and girls. It's me, Dr. Moody, and welcome back to our podcast, Moody Mornings, where we have exactly what you need for your moody mornings. Well, we're back today with episode number 26, and on today's episode, we'll be sharing the story of Thanksgiving. As always, before we start, let's welcome my co-host, Pastor co-host Steve. How are you doing today?
Well, good Moody morning, Dr. Moody. I'm good today. How are you?
Oh, I'm feeling so thankful today, Pastor Steve.
Yeah, we are right around the corner from Thanksgiving, and we do have a lot to be thankful for, Dr. Moody. What is it that you're thankful for?
Well, the food, of course. The beans, the greens, potatoes, tomatoes, lambs, rams, hogs, dogs, chicken, turkey, rabbit, you name it.
Dr. Moody, I think you've seen way too many YouTube videos.
What's that?
Dr. Moody, come on. You know, there's much more to Thanksgiving than just the food. Would you like to help me share the story of Thanksgiving with the kids?
Oh, sure, as long as you feed me.
Dr. Moody, we'll take care of that. Don't worry.
Yes.
Well, why don't you start at the beginning with the Christians leaving England and why they left?
Well, okay, all right. Well, a long time ago, in the early 1600s, King James I of England did not permit the people of England to worship God freely. They did not have religious freedom. Therefore, a group of Christians called separatists or pilgrims left England and went to Holland, where they could freely worship the Lord. After some time in Holland, they decided to sail across the Atlantic Ocean in the New World, as America was called at the time. Because it cost lots of money to sail to America, these Christians had to borrow money to pay for their passage. They sailed from England to the New World on a ship called the Mayflower on September 6th. This meant they would be on open seas during the season of very fierce storms. In mid-ocean, the storms finally overtook them. All the passengers crowded down into the hold of the ship as the storms tossed the ship to and fro. The strong winds and huge waves continued day after day to batter the ship. Many became very seasick. There were other hardships on the Mayflower besides the storms. The only food they had to eat was boiled beans, dried peas, salt pork, and hardtack, very hard bread. The children and adults were all cooped up in the hold of the ship. It was far too dangerous for them to go up on deck. One man who went up on deck was swept overboard by a huge wave. It took 7 long weeks for them to complete their journey across the Atlantic Ocean. Finally, on the distant horizon, they could see the New World. The pilgrims were grateful for their long, difficult journey that was almost over. They knelt down on the deck of the ship and they thanked God for bringing them safely to the New World of America. The Mayflower sailed along the coast of Massachusetts. Though the pilgrims had arrived at the New World, they couldn't go ashore immediately, for the water was too shallow for their ship. 16 men rowed ashore in a smaller boat to bring the needed food and fresh water for those on the Mayflower. They returned with fresh water and food. Later, they left the Mayflower to look for a place to build ships and set up camp. They decided to make their settlement at a place called Plymouth. The women and children stayed on the Mayflower until the men built shelters for them on shore. The weather that November was very cold in Massachusetts.
Well, the men and older boys worked hard and long hours building shelters for the families. For 4 long months, the women and children waited on the Mayflower, while the men cut down trees and sawed them into lumber to build very rough, primitive houses. They had to keep on the lookout for Indians, who were the only people living in America at the time. That's the reason the Indians are also called Native Americans. The Pilgrims wondered if the Indians could be hostile or dangerous, or if they would be friendly. The Pilgrims knew it could be very dangerous for everyone. Winter was coming on, and food would be very scarce since crops could not be planted until the next spring. To them, America was a beautiful country with great big forests and lots of wilderness country. America had no roads, no cities, no towns, and no stores. There was no place to buy food. Though life would be hard for the Pilgrims, to them it was worth the hardships in order to worship God freely. Finally, the families were able to move from the Mayflower into their homes on shore. Several families lived in the same house since there were not enough houses for each family to have separate houses. But the Pilgrims were so glad to be off the Mayflower. They did not mind being crowded into small houses. They were just glad to be on shore and have a roof over their heads. During that difficult cold winter, with not much food, nearly half of the people became sick and died.
One day, 2 Indians came to visit the Pilgrims. One of them was an Indian chief named Samoset. He could speak a little English, which he learned from English sailors. The other Indian, named Squanto, could speak English very well. The Pilgrims were glad Squanto could speak to them in English. As a young man, Squanto was kidnapped by a wicked Englishman who took him to Africa and sold him as a slave. Later, Squanto escaped to England, where he worked for a wealthy merchant and learned to speak English. Finally, he was able to return to the Indians in America. Squanto and Chief Samoset told the Pilgrims that the great Chief Massasoit was coming with 60 of his warriors. Almost immediately, the Pilgrims looked up and saw the Indian warriors coming over the hill. What could the Pilgrims do? They must quickly make friends with the Indians and let them know that they had not come to cheat and harm the Indians as other white men had done. They knew that they must explain the right way, or the Indians might kill them. One of the Pilgrims, Edward Winslow, said, "I will go and tell them that we want to make peace. Squanto, you come with me to interpret what I say." "But you must take gifts," said one of the Pilgrims. Quickly, the Pilgrims gathered knives, jewelry, biscuits, and butter to offer as gifts to Chief Massasoit. Everyone watched anxiously as Edward Winslow and Squanto approached the Indians. Squanto translated Winslow's words into the Indian language, explaining that the white man wished to make peace with the Indians and to be their friends. Edward Winslow presented the gifts to Chief Massasoit, who then laid down his bow and arrows and ordered his warriors to do the same. Chief Massasoit agreed to come with some of his warriors to talk with the Pilgrim leaders. This pleased everybody. But meanwhile, Edward Winslow was kept with the other Indians as a hostage. After talking with the Pilgrims, Chief Massasoit and his men understood that the white men wanted to be friends. They made a peace treaty with the Pilgrims and promised not to harm them. From a distance, the Pilgrims watched and finally breathed great sighs of relief. They were thankful that God was protecting them. Squanto did not leave when the other Indians left. He stayed with the Pilgrims a long time to help them. He taught them how to plant corn, using fish as fertilizer. He told them that they must guard the plants and crops at night from wolves, for the wolves knew how to dig up the fish. Squanto guided them on fishing and hunting trips. He taught them how to build traps to catch a certain kind of fish called herring. The Pilgrims knew that God had sent Squanto to help them, for they would have not survived in this new land called America without the help of Squanto.
The Pilgrims were thankful to God for his caring for them. Less than a year after they arrived, they now had 11 buildings in their settlement. They stored their corn for the winter, which grew from tiny seeds they got from the Indians. They dried the fish, cod and bass, that they had caught. It would be good to eat during the cold winter months ahead. They also dried duck, wild turkey, and deer meat. They were very thankful to have so much food to store up for the long winter months. Governor Bradford, the governor over this small band of English people, announced that they were going to celebrate their first year in America by holding a feast to thank God for his goodness to them. The men went out to shoot birds and turkeys to have meat for the feast. The women, they baked corn and wheat bread in outdoor ovens. They prepared all kinds of foods with many vegetables and nuts they had gathered. Governor Bradford invited Chief Massasoit to join them in their Thanksgiving feast.
When Chief Massasoit arrived, to everyone's surprise, he was accompanied by 90 Indian warriors. The Pilgrim women gasped in dismay. Would they have enough food for so many people? And Chief Massasoit solved this problem by sending out his warriors to kill 5 deer so there would be plenty of meat for all. Finally, the food was ready. They all found their places as one of the leading pilgrims stood up to thank God for his many blessings to them that year. He thanked God for their crops, which had grown so well, and that they had plenty of food. He thanked God for the kind of help and friendship of the Indians. He thanked God for their good help and for the safety and protection that he had given to them that year. The Pilgrims' dessert that first Thanksgiving in the new land was cornmeal pudding sweetened with dried berries. The Indians amazed the Pilgrims by popping corn over a fire. They made popcorn balls and sweetened them with maple syrup, which was a treat for the children. The Thanksgiving feast lasted for 3 days, during which the Pilgrim boys, men and boys, played games and held shooting contests with the Indians. The women and girls had fun watching and preparing food for the large, happy crowd. How thankful the Pilgrims were that they had made peace with their Indian neighbors. They were grateful for the way God had blessed them. They were happy to be in a land where they could worship God freely, and they thanked Him from their hearts. We are told that the New England Puritans continued to celebrate the Thanksgiving feast each year, and each year they placed 5 grains of corn on each plate to remind them of the terrible days when the first Pilgrims had to limit each person's daily food to just 5 grains of corn. For some of them, 5 grains of corn stood for 5 reasons to be thankful.
In the early American colonies, Thanksgiving was celebrated for many years on different days. Sarah Hale, who lived in the 1800s, believed that Thanksgiving should be celebrated by all of the states on the same day as a national holiday. So Mrs. Hale wrote hundreds of letters to mayors, governors, congressmen, and even presidents urging them to adopt the national Thanksgiving days. After 17 years, her efforts were finally rewarded. President Lincoln proclaimed the last Thursday of November as a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father. All the presidents since that time have agreed with Sarah Hale that everybody should celebrate Thanksgiving on the same day. A national Thanksgiving Day, the 4th Thursday in November, is now a wonderful tradition in our country. Each year at Thanksgiving, most Americans gather with friends and family to feast on turkey and other delicious food and to thank God for His bountiful blessing to them and to America. But some Americans forget that every good thing they have comes from God, and they do not thank God even on Thanksgiving Day. But let us not be like that and forget God, especially at the Thanksgiving season. Let us remember to thank God like the Pilgrims did that first Thanksgiving when they thanked Him for His provision and His care for them.
Boys and girls, what are you thankful for? Would you like to share with us? Do you have a question about the Bible, or maybe a question for Dr. Moody? We would love to hear from you. Have your parents message us on Instagram, and who knows, maybe we might just answer your question here on Moody Mornings. Next time on Moody Mornings, we'll be starting off a very special Christmas series. Be sure to tune in. Don't forget to check us out online, and have your parents search for us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Just have them search for CCGS Kids. And don't forget to follow our podcast, Moody Mornings, so you don't miss out on any new episodes. And remember, no matter what time of the day, you can always have a Moody morning. See you next time.